Cool. All right, here we go. What's up, everybody? My name is Richard Terrell. I go by Kirby Kid. You can see here, this is design oriented, and this is all the stuff we do: video streams, discords, blogs, and websites. You can check out our YouTube channel, on our Twitter, and our they're all at the name Design Oriented. Our Discord is, the link is in the Twitter. That's pretty much all you need to know. We talk about game design, and we do a topic every day. Sometimes the topics are a little bit more complex. So, like today, I'm planning a multi-part series, and we're talking about RPG elements, and really the long and weird history of RPGs and JRPGs, and how these elements have sort of integrated and proliferated among many other genres is kind of up for discussion. But we're going to kind of get to the whole thing on a very ground level, and at least try to understand RPG elements a little bit better, or at least what I mean by them. Here is our outline. So we've had discussions like this before on the Discord, and I ask people questions like, what are RPG elements good for, or where do they come from? And these are kind of difficult questions to answer at first. A lot of people have really nebulous genre definitions, and therefore, because they lack specificity there, they really can't do anything more specific beyond that point, and they just kind of grumble and say language is useless because they're not really trying hard enough. But here at Design Oriented, we have a lot of specific words and specific meanings when we say things, and more often than not, we're willing to, on the spot, give clarity. So what we're talking about here with RPGs, RPG systems are things that we typically see in a bunch of RPGs, especially classic RPGs like experience point systems, leveling up based systems, games that allow you to equip items and amass all these different items, characters that have these stat based attributes, and these stats go up, most likely up and up and up, but they can go up and down depending on what you equip to them. You most likely engage in some kind of turn-based or mostly turn-based battle system. There's a whole separate genre for action RPGs, and we'll get to that later, but we're mostly just talking about the bare bones of what we need to count as sort of having an RPG battle system. But really, when you think about the history, and you think about the history of things like D&D, and you think about the limitations of both board games and video games way back in the day, RPGs really weren't about these systems, but these systems were used as a means of putting a certain level of complexity and detail into their games, right? So if you wanted to make a game about people that adventure to new places and talk to people in towns and occasionally wander into dungeons and do battle with things, like, how can you represent all these things in your game? Well, long answer short, especially if you have limited resources and limited technology, you just gotta simplify things and abstract things until you can get something that kind of scratches that itch. So RPGs, and even tabletop RPGs, with their ability to roll characters and simulate personalities, backgrounds, histories, stats, abilities, customs, just about anything you can write into a rule book, you can simulate somewhat by describing it, having players choose among options, having players roll dice to choose among varying degrees of those options. Like, there's the worlds and the possibilities are wide open whenever you're thinking about how do we translate something like Lord of the Rings movie into something where we can interact with it and play with it and have all these other kinds of outcomes. Things like D&D, though, need a dungeon master. You need that sort of living, breathing, intelligent agent to pull details together. Details that can sometimes be added into your game experience by the whims of the players. But otherwise, somebody there had to be like, oh, okay, you said this, let me figure out what that means in context and sort of guide the experience. Digital RPGs are different, but they're definitely inspired by those kinds of experiences and those roots. We still have the characters that get rolled somewhat. We still have these stats that power their abilities. We still have this sort of, to various degrees, ability to explore places, ability to investigate by talking to people, the ability to sort of find out more and have everything fit into this world context. I think that's one thing that people pretty like about RPGs. And there's very few RPGs that get away with things without having some story, right? It seems necessary. It seems like the whole reason you would lean on these tropes and these systems and this history in the first place, it's if one of your primary concerns, one of the most important things you want to do with your game is to, convey a world and possibly tell a story. So right off the bat, RPGs are aimed at something different. And all these systems, for one reason or another, due to limitations and otherwise, were created to convey details to the players and to people watching. So I think that's one thing that's really important to consider when we're talking about RPG elements. They're originally designed just to be like a way of conveying a whole bunch of details that aren't necessarily supposed to tie together, aren't necessarily supposed to interact, aren't necessarily supposed to be deep, aren't necessarily supposed to be competitively viable, but first and foremost, details. So we'll get to more of that later, but I think understanding what the design goal is and what these things, these abstractions and systems are modeling, is really important to understanding just how they integrate with other kinds of systems, more gameplay-oriented systems. So, I mentioned abstractions, right? Adrian, you there? Can you hear me? You eating your salad?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, feel free to ask questions or chime in. I guess it'll be a little easier to jump in a bit. But this is the point in the conversation where we talk about abstractions, and I wrote articles about this a long time ago. I don't know if you remember them, Adrian. Let me know if you do. But it was where is it? How big is this? Can you read that stream? Abstraction. So I wrote this series called Abstract on Abstraction, and that was after I wrote this article here called Embrace the Abstraction. And one of the cool things about video games is the fact that they are abstractions, right? They're not intended to be perfect simulations of things we see in real life. They're taking bits and pieces of it, remixing it, adding their own flair, style, flavor, whatever. And that was the main purpose of this article right here. So I wrote it, and that's where this cool image comes from. I made it for this article. This is the image on my Twitter, by the way, but it's essentially like a whole bunch of pixel art, and you have these three arms, just embracing it and grabbing at it and taking a hold of it for what it is, even though it looks kind of crazy. That's the whole idea. And it just talks about the medium of video games in general and how, to convey ideas, which I mentioned Pokemon here, they had to simplify things and make stylized decisions. Like you're walking in grass and all of a sudden this weird transition happens and you're in this battle mode. Well, it's easy enough to understand what happened. You got attacked by a Caterpie. That makes sense. But the fact that the game had to go from one system to another, and that when you're battling Caterpie, you only have a Pokemon in front of you with 4 moves, and you can only pick those moves, and all other kinds of simulations, is there to get you into the same world space, mind space, head space of the world that they're trying to convey, even if you are engaging in something like a battle or exploring a town or whatever. And video games, we use all kinds of simplifications and stylized abstractions, even some that show the very same thing, like this Final Fantasy example. You see this enemy on the overworld, but when you go into battle, it pretty much looks the same. This was kind of the dream of things like Pokemon. Like, the dream of older RPGs where, like, you want to see an enemy on the overworld and you want to battle it. And games like Xenoblade do it, and certainly games like Chrono Trigger did it back in the day, but every developer has to pick and choose which details they think are important to them and which ones they can actually pull off with their resources. So that's the basic idea of abstraction, but there's this idea that I added to it a while later, just like what happens if you take something that's somebody else's simplified idea and then you simplify it again. What happens if you are inspired by somebody's video game instead of the thing that video game was inspired by, right? And you hear it all the time in creative mediums. When you're wanting to be a game developer, you gotta like more than games, right? Otherwise, you run the very high risk of all your stuff being derivative. And the fact that people can sort of see your game and at a glance or at just a few seconds of playing it, feel like you have no ideas of your own, that you just copied XYZ, that the game quote-unquote has no soul. Like, that's something that's real and we can sense, but it's hard to understand why or put our finger on. But that's something that I think a lot of creators want to avoid. So, copying other people's copies, the meaning and the sort of connection to the real core source of inspiration or the core lived experience gets weakened and weakened. And a lot of times you copy things just because they did it instead of knowing why they did it, which seems to be like one of the core problems of just about every learning situation from on the planet, right? You copy what you think it does or what it looks like it does instead of what it actually does. You just copy the steps instead of copying the understanding or the ability to apply those steps. Happens all the time. So that's what this article series talks about. We're not going to get into it now, but it's the abstract on abstraction. So I don't know about you, Adrian, but I feel like a lot of games, I feel like when you're making games and you're kind of teaching yourself, by the way, so many people are apparently just teaching themselves, and that's just the state in which we live in, right? That's just how it is. People play games for a little bit, like them, want to get into the game industry, maybe go to the school for it, maybe just spend their free time teaching themselves and either make their own independent games or team up with other independents or get an entry-level position or work their way up through being a tester. And I've met all these people, right? I know people of all these kinds, and but one way or another, most of these people are making it up. And even if you go to a school, like, we don't have a ton of professors that come from a long history of things because we don't really have a long history. So I can understand why a lot of people just appear to be copying things. That's a very seemingly important and necessary step for when you're sort of self-teaching. You copy to both understand what it is and to get a feel for what you like and don't like. Unfortunately, this is at the state in which a lot of people are just like in our industry at the high level and the low level, just kind of like never quite pushed it past that developmental stage. So a lot of times they don't know why they put elements into the game. They just know other games do it and it's popular. Throw RPG elements in because Call of Duty did it, and make it persistent this because that popular game did it, or everyone's chasing PUBG, everyone's chasing Fortnite, everyone's chasing roguelikes, everyone's chasing like the same things. And trends are trends, but that does, and then you can like try to make a game aiming directly for that hot new trend, but it doesn't mean that you have to copy things without knowing why you're doing it or knowing how to correctly integrate it into your project. So I think a lot of people are just copying junk, and it's so obvious, and I don't know what to do about it.
The most blatant are some of those Dark Souls clones.
Oh yeah, let me see if I can turn this up. You guys check if you're listening, check if the audio of Adrian's loud enough. But yeah, Dark Souls is a really popular game to copy right now. We went through a little roguelike phase a few years ago. We're in a PUBG-ish phase right now. MOBAs were kind of in a phase, people trying to make their own like third-person MOBA or a MOBA flavor of this, or make a more free-to-play MOBA than League of Legends, and lots of different MOBAs popped up.
Metroid's another one too.
People have not stopped copying Metroid. And by people, I mostly just mean indies. And they pretty blatantly copy it, and they really have not breathed new life into that style of level design almost at all. And how many years has it been? 20? Yeah, just about. That's crazy. So yeah. And like the weirdest part is when you copy something, your copy can be so close, and you just change one small detail, and then you're just like, what is this, right? Like one example that comes to mind is Guacamelee, and they Metroidvania gate sections with these huge colored blocks that you're supposed to hit with a color-coordinated color attack that corresponds with that block. But it's, and like, you could say, oh, it's like Metroid doors and the colored. One, Metroid didn't have that many colors on its door. Two, it wasn't the like only way in Metroid gated. And it had secrets and workarounds and tunnels and bomb holes and tubes and elevators and doors and things like that. So it's like,
to understand that your game world needs to be more detailed and rich than just arbitrary blockages to create a Metroidvania like back and forth and double backing on the same environments is the point of the Metroid style level design. Not the fact that you go back and forth, but the fact of what does that mean to define your world. And Metro used it to make a very sort of cohesive alien environment in which is non-linear, and when you go off in one direction you can loop back into areas you've explored in a bunch of different ways that expand as you get more powers. And you're like, oh, now I have super jump, now I can super run, now I have bomb, I can go up through the floor, now I have freeze gun, I can climb back up this chasm, like things like that, helping you piece everything together. It's just more sophisticated. And the fact that, you know, Guacamelee wasn't a bad example for that one aspect, but it definitely, you could see its roots and see where it kind of came short. Yeah, Guacamelee's environments were a lot more linear too. So it's just like, if you're going to be more linear and have a more obvious gate, those are like the two things that you probably shouldn't pair together when attempting to do something like a Metroidvania.
And that goes back to the concept of abstraction.
Yeah. What are you copying and why, right? And like how far can you break it down? So like another way to understand it is when you're a creator and you're first getting into a medium, everything is new. So you're taking everything in its completed, final, wholesale form. You're watching movies in their completed form. You're playing video games in their completed form. And if you just play one video game or watch one movie, you really wouldn't know what movies are because you have nothing to compare it to. But every time you experience something else, you have a point of comparison. And instead of just watching one movie or playing one game going, this is the greatest thing ever, I want to do something just like it, but, you know, with my own twist. I'll just change the main character's name and slightly change its hair color and make it freaking magic wands instead of swords. Like that, those aren't meaningful and significant changes. Yeah, but every time you play more games, you're supposed to be like, oh, this game did it differently. Which one do I like better? Oh, this game did it even more differently. Which one do I like better? Oh, and the more times you do that, you're basically taking that huge chunk you would have copied and splitting in half, and splitting in half, and splitting in half until you have these really fine pieces. And that, I think, is the ultimate goal of a designer, to have as fine pieces as possible till you can go, oh, well, like a sprinkle of this, a dab of that, a pinch of this, a teaspoon of that, a tablespoon of this, and like mix it all together, and you can very finely control the kind of experience you want to deliver, in addition to knowing like how those ingredients interact and why you would add them in the first place. So it's just kind of like a rough metaphor I threw out there. So we're back to RPGs, and the next point is, if there was only okay, so let's consider a few different RPG like elements. Let's go over to this team builder for Pokemon. Pokemon, this is the Pokemon Showdown Battle Simulator, and it lets me mess with Pokemon stats and look at them in a really organized way. So we're using this for now. You have Pokemon moves like this, and this one Pokemon named Abomasnow is has all these moves available, right? That's a lot of moves, but you only can pick 4. And you got to pick the 4 that work well with the Pokemon you've raised and the team you're trying to use. And you have these, like a lot of RPGs have moves, right? But a lot of games do too, so it's not that big of a deal. Pokemon has abilities that activate automatically, so these are like passive abilities that you see a lot in RPGs. Each Pokemon can be equipped with an item, so this is more like equipment, less like items, more like equipment, like armor or a helmet or shoes or whatever. You know, the level, all the Pokemon in Pokemon Showdown are pretty much level 100. You can change it if you want. Like, I like level 1 Abomasnow. You know, like, that's not possible. Look at my stats. Just tanked. But if I go level 50, yeah, oh, my stats are a little bit bigger, but obviously to even the playing field, almost everyone has all their Pokemon at 100, and this is what the expected stat values are, and this is how the sheer volume of variety in Pokemon, we establish a little bit of normalcy to then make predictions and play a strategy game around. But we have things like, let me see if I can make it even bigger. Hit points and attack point or attacking points and defense points and special attacking points and special defense and speed. So these are typically what we call stats. And stats, I feel like RPG stats or stats like this are different from just, oh, every video game has numbers, because these are user facing. These are meant to be observed like this for the user for the purpose of playing the game. Numbers crunched behind the scenes aren't stats. And they aren't. And even if you can know them and they help you out, if they're really not visible and they're really just there to be part of an equation that spits out a whole nother number or thing for you to then deal with, then we're not going to think of those in the same way. These are stats. You're supposed to look at them and go, how can I make this better? Like for this, Pokemon have these EV values that you can invest in a few of your stats. So as you can see here, sliding them up and down changes my hit point value just a little bit. This is the max and min of the hit point range that it can play around with. So I can give them a little less attack, a little bit more of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And you can pretty much customize your own your own Pokemon within reason. This changes stuff too, right? Changes the numbers around. You can see the little bars jumping around. But otherwise, hopefully I didn't screw this up. I didn't want to save any of these changes. Oops. Well, it was max attack, probably adamant. Yeah, minus special attack. Something like this, probably. That's fine. So yes, these are stats, and RPGs use these a lot. So I feel like some of the most common RPG elements are experience-based hit points and stats like this. And experience-based hit points introduce all these issues into your game, like balance issues of, well, and let's say put some kind of cap on the situation or give you some really clear feedback. It's really easy to be under-leveled or over-leveled and really hard to be at level, whatever that means. And for these stats, there's a lot of them that have a lot of numbers, and it's a lot of data, and the whole question is like, well, what is all this good for, and why do I need to know this, and how does it make the game more fun? And I feel like for RPGs on a very basic level, just having the stats in there is the point. Like, look, your character is different from mine, and we can define it using these numerical values and compare it. Look, your Pokemon is just a little bit weaker than mine. Mine's max attack. Yours is slightly less than max attack. Like, sure. That is a thing, but the ability for the game or the players to put that into a context that's sort of clear and readable and interesting and maybe even played around is a whole different story. And I feel that for any one-dimensional element you add into your game, like a stat, like an individual stat like that, it becomes harder and harder to work it into the gameplay meaningfully, because it makes it harder to achieve good feedback for the player. Outside of menus like this, getting a feel for these stats is incredibly hard. And unless somebody tells you, or unless you look it up, what Obama Snow's basic stat spread looks like, it's just kind of hard to even get a feel for this. I mean, you know some Pokemon are fast, like Cinccino, look at that speed. You know some Pokemon are good at one thing, defense, like this Fortress, the same Fortress, so yeah, it's good at defense. But otherwise, this is a ton of data to sift through that doesn't have necessarily a clear context for you to help you understand it. Because once all these numbers, you're in battle, all these numbers kind of go behind the scenes, and it's hard to tell what's going on. So I say every time you add a stat like this, you also run the risk of flattening out your interactivity. So I'm going to give a good example of that, but let's go to Spelunky for now. Let me see if I got an article on Spelunky. Spelunky, I've talked about it before. We have a video on Design Oriented's YouTube channel where I talk about Spelunky. But essentially, this is the original Spelunky that I played a long time ago, and I drew this chart about how it pretty much created its gameplay, which is cool. I play with a Wiimote. That's my control scheme. You know, here's some enemy elements and other stuff, blah, 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 blah. And then I played the new version, Spelunk. Yeah, right here, many years later. But one of the things that I think is not interesting about Spelunky. Like it's you know, it's all right. The game's amazing. Sure, have a ton of fun. But in general, the way that the game handled power-ups. Where is it? That's funny. But in Spelunky, you can almost take every item in the game right here and just have it, right? Kind of like an RPG. You have like endless pockets almost. Grab all the money you want. Even though you can only hold one weapon in your hand at a time, which is a cool limitation, all the other passive power-ups you can keep on your character and have almost all at one time. So let's see this video. Let's see if it has a good example of that. Does it? No, this person sucks. Why did I link this video? But yeah, there's a ton of power-ups and abilities that you can have in Spelunky, and when you, for the most part, you grab them without thinking because you don't have to think. All those abilities have no drawbacks. You just stack it up. And I feel like when you are trying to model something that you have no direct experience with, especially, your tendency is to put in the complexity and the detail no matter what, and then kind of see what happens. And a lot of times, by meeting that primary goal of like, oh, now it's in the game, now Spelunky has a bunch of items, or now this RPG has a bunch of attacks or items or whatever, spells, you usually don't think about how they fit together, especially if your goal is just to get it in the first place. So we look at something like Spelunky. Is the footage all choppy, guys? Let me know. Is the audio choppy? Yeah, so we look at something like Spelunky, and if the game were trying to model itself after some real life experience or whatever, or some real life sport or activity, you would probably intuitively come to a lot of the same limitations that you do in real life. Like, oh, you can only carry so much, you can only have so much. There's trade-offs to doing things in real life, and then you'd probably translate that into the game one way or another. But a lot of times when you just put in things in your game and they interact with each other in this abstract way, like the whole reason you have endless pockets is because you don't have a backpack, right? If you had a backpack and you have to worry about how much space and things can fit in your backpack and how heavy it is, you probably wouldn't have this sort of like infinite pockets, endless pockets issue. So I feel like another sort of pitfall and drawback when you're abstracting off other people's stuff and copying copies is that you just copy sort of the immediate presentation of it and the things you like about it without ever considering trade-offs and drawbacks and so on and so forth. So that's why we have a lot of situations in RPGs where you're like, look, my character has an endless list of attacks. Let me just pick the one I want. Like, for better or for worse, like that has an effect. And if you haven't thought about it, and you haven't thought about a lot of the ways that these rules and these details and complexities you're throwing to your game are going to interact, chances are they're not going to interact well, because that's just what design is. It's so much harder to build a tight, clear, and interesting game experience when you try to do it. So chances are if you just throw a bunch of stuff in, you're not going to hit that mark. Yeah, this is a feedback problem. I mentioned this before. But League of Legends looks like garbage. Overwatch gets really busy and messy. And we contrast that versus Pokemon. So Pokemon, especially the actual 3DS, Game Boy, GBA, DS style games, the battle is turn-based, and each turn, is slow. A little too slow, but at least when you're playing, you get all this feedback. Like, let's see if I can play one and not lose too badly. Where random battles. Sure, why not? Username, why not? Why not? ZZZZ, choose name. So when you're playing Pokemon, you have plenty of time to think like, oh, look, it's a Noctowl. It's level 88. I got my Flareon level 88. Let me check out what other Pokemon are randomly on my team because I'm playing a random team. I got a T-Tar, Mesprit, Kloitzer, Water, Ice, Rock, Dark, Psychic, Fire. So this thing's a Psychic, so maybe I'll throw out my Dark type sucker because it resists Flying and Dark. Let's see what you got. Hurricane, it missed. I think Hurricane has an increased chance to miss because I put up the freaking whatever. Let's pursue because he toxic at me. What a jerk. No, I'm toxic. That's fine. So now we're gonna go. He's probably gonna toxic again. So let's just Stone Edge. I didn't have any rocks. You get hit by my Stone Edge and you out. So yeah, I can take this one turn at a time. Look at how much toxic damage I racked up. Oh, it's a Tapu Koko. He's filled with Electric Surge, and I have no ground types except for this one. Let's hope he doesn't have Hidden Power, Grass, Sucker, Dazzling Gleam, Swampert. Yeah, leftover Swampert, so he's defensive. And Koko took Life Orb damage, it looked like. Haha, oh no, he took... So this guy's probably going to leave because I'm going to kill him in one hit with my Earthquake. So we're going to anticipate that. I throw up the Stealth Rocks. Oh, what a Wild Charge. I'm not double switching on this. No way. And I'm not fearing your HP Grass, which would kill me in one hit. Let's Toxic. Brave Bird, you suck. Why are you staying in? So I don't want my Swampert to take any more damage now that he's on a timer because I got him poisoned. Let's go back into our T-Tar. Why not? Give him some extra chip damage. Resist the Brave Bird because I'm a rock type, and see how all this complexity plays out in a pace that's more suited for all this complexity, right? Like every turn, I got 2 minutes and around 2 minutes to make my decision. I can calculate moves, like calculate. I don't even know how to pull up a calculator. I don't play this thing. Vi logo. I don't even know what that means. Let's Fire Blast. Oh, he has Dazzling Gleam. You get Fire Blast. I keep critting this guy, and now he's out. I don't want to forfeit. So in this situation, he's got 4 more Pokemon. Tropius comes out. Tropius is a flying grass type. He's totally going to eat it from my Stone Edge, which I might as well blast him with. Super effective. He gets killed. Probably did that so I would take one more turn of toxic damage. So now I can only stay in one more turn period. So he's probably going to start setting up with this jerk. But this is a psychic Pokemon. He can't hit me with his best move. But he's probably going to hit me with something else. Let's crunch. Psyshock. Man, this player is terrible. And the defense fell. So now I got a lucky defense drop, which you can see here. And I know, like, oh, whatever other Pokemon I bring out is going to have an advantage if I attack it physically. So I'm going to bring out, what is this? Let's bring out Guts Flareon. He's probably have a Poison Orb. Yeah, so that at the end of this turn, it's going to get stronger. And I'm going to use Flame Charge to get some speed. Moonblast, I resist it because I'm a Fire type. And now he dies, and I get plus 1 speed level, so whatever he brings out next, I'll have an even greater chance of outspeeding it. Oh, Zygar, and he resists my stabs, but I got this freaking Facade here. Eat it. Outrage. No, oh yeah. Okay, I survived it. Oh shoot. That's a Zygar level 73, and it's in full father form now, as they call it. Oh, it's much more defensive. You see that? But that's fine. He locked himself into Outrage, and now he's confused. He's going to be... Oh, he had a Lumberry? What do I have? Do I have a U-turn or Sphere? Hey, what do I have to beat this thing? They didn't give me... Ice Shard? What's my most offensive Mon? Let's just send out Mesprit. Mess him up. And let's go with Psyshock. You dead. Any questions, Adrian? As I finish this guy off for being a terrible battler.
No, not yet, but it was... You knew everything... You very well knew what you were doing, but I had a hard time following along because I don't know Pokemon as well as you do.
Yeah, in general, I'm trying to show you how complex this game is. Like, look at how every move right here has a type and a base power and an accuracy and a description. I know all these by heart and their base powers and stuff. So I'm already thinking like in light levels, like way beyond these individual things, but it's still a ton to keep track of. Each Pokemon, the stats are displayed here. You can see their item torrent and all that. Hi, you could have crit me. And that was his last Pokemon. I say GG, and we move on with our lives. So, complexity, like, that is a strategy game, and it's a strategy game's worth of complexity. There's a lot of things I was telling you that didn't happen, and could have happened, and maybe would have happened, and there's a lot of things I'm looking at the bottom. Just imagine that level of complexity in an action game, in a game where things are moving in real time and people can't just pause and point at the screen, in a game where people don't have 2 minutes to make each decision, and you can get a better feel for what League of Legends is like, and on a lesser scale, what LoL is like. I'm not going to play a footage of League of Legends. Everyone knows. You can just find it on Twitch at any time. But that game is so visually busy, and regardless of how well they pulled off their competitive multiplayer gameplay, LoL is like a RPG that you play from start to finish, all in like a 15-30 minute sitting with a team of other friends against a team of friends. And so many things about buffs and temporary debuffs and leveling up and gold and builds and stuff. All that is in there. Hard to represent visually, very messy with the feedback, but they do it anyway. And I feel like a lot of those things are drawbacks when you incorporate RPG systems. And half the time you're like, why even incorporate them? Like, what are these individual systems really bringing to the party? So that's what we're going to discuss now. I think, Adrian, you remember this old series. It's,
yeah.
Like on my old blog, Critical Gaming, I have these courses, and this is pretty much like the fast track to understanding some really core concepts for game design. It starts off with 101 with some basic stuff. 102, 3 does dynamics, and 4 talks about a few specific genres as examples. 5 talks about skill and multiplayer. There's a lot of articles there. But once you get to 6, it talks about complexity and emergence. Linearity and emergence, depth versus complexity, depth from complexity, evaluating combat, which is just basically gameplay. You don't really need to have things punching and kicking each other to have combat, just things working for or against each other. But finally we get to the series here called Interesting Choices. And this is an old article series I did inspired by Sid Meier's quote, which I can read because I know how to read. And this is from Jesper Juhl's Dictionary of Video Game Theory. According to Sid Meier, a good game is a series of interesting choices. In an interesting choice, no single option is clearly better than the others. The options are not equally attractive, and the player must be able to make an informed decision. So this is the best definition and the most effective one for when talking about games being deep, like competitive games being deep. There's other kinds of depth, the kinds of depth that poems and movies and books and art and paintings and stuff can reach, but this kind of depth is more competitive, head-to-head, interactive kind of depth, and this is what we're looking for. But this entire series investigates that, right? And there's this part right here, I think. Yeah, it's where I introduce this thought experiment called Fictive RPG. Even got my own fake start screen right here. The Fictive RPG is basically like, okay, a lot of games try to be deep, and let's try to make a deep game according to how we defined it with as few elements as possible so we can get a better idea of how each element adds to the whole overall experience and what the pros and cons are. So we start off with 0, nothing, and then we just throw 2 characters in. They have 20 hit points each, and hit points in this case, a lot of games use health and life. This isn't necessarily an RPG thing, but we'll see very soon just how much the RPG elements add and subtract to it. You can read the article series for yourself, but essentially, if the RPG just had one basic attack and it's turn-based, whoever goes first in this situation would win. That's not interesting. So then what if we added magic? And then the magic you have a heal item too. Like, what would happen? Well, each player would use magic until they're about to die, and then they would heal. And then they'd use magic until they're about to die, and then heal. So that doesn't really make it interesting either. And then what if we added a double blind guessing system? just like Pokemon. Well, things get a little bit more interesting because for every move, instead of doing the expected thing on the sort of rat race you're running, that you would have an interesting choice to make. Like, is he going to heal, and should I guess that he's going to heal? Or is he going to bluff it, and when I attack, does that go through? This is just demonstrating the basic, like, what they call a 50-50 in a double-blind situation. But, Pokemon does it really well as a strategy game for incorporating this double-blindness. Other RPGs don't, and I feel like in order to understand just how much RPGs build up their gameplay from these smaller elements, we're going to not go in the double-blind route and just stick with pure options, stats, items, those kinds of things. So the article goes on and basically explains that it's really hard. It's really hard to make interesting gameplay when all you're doing is adding these, what I call one-dimensional parameters. Hit points is like a one-dimensional value that just goes up or down. Items, when you use them, attacks can be very one-dimensional. It's really hard to put in enough complexity where it creates that interesting decision experience. But then I broke it down further and said these are the things you need to do it, and you need them in a certain proportion. And essentially what happens is every new complexity you add, it's got to basically make it harder and harder for people to figure out what the optimal thing is, right? And a basic flowchart, if you keep adding stuff and maybe add new parameters and add these other parameters and then add some more stuff over here and then add some more stuff over there, your ability to sort of calculate all those possibilities, right, as I kind of total here, 18 total possibilities, 27 if you add that, 36 if you add that, all of a sudden it's 102, and then who knows how many. One way to sort of create a deep system is to make the calculation so complex, so hard that people can't do it on the fly, and then they're going to be forced to rely on other kinds of heuristical learning, which is kind of what you want, but that still doesn't make the game unsolvable. It just makes it harder for people to do it without math or other kinds of problem-solving skills. So now we're kind of under the impression that there's little you can do to make a one-dimensional system interesting in a multi-dimensional way. And I was thinking about it, I'm like, I don't think there's been an RPG that has a deep combat system for its single player, at least. Or, yeah, like, all these problems keep coming in. The game has so many complexities, it's hard to know them. When you're in the actual battle, it's hard to get good feedback for all the possibilities. And even when you do get good feedback on all the possibilities, it's just a complex... It's a long equation, but it's not a hard equation, right? Like, there are hard equations in real life that real mathematicians and physicists are trying to solve. But a long equation doesn't have to be hard. It could just be a series of addition or multiplication problems or whatever, and it just takes a while to do it. So I don't think RPGs can get deep. Not like that. I played a ton of them. Let's just go to the list. Just like Children of Mana, Chrono Trigger, Chrono Cross, Contact, Demon Warriors, Monsters, some Earthbound, some Mother right there. A lot of the Final Fantasy series I've played. Played enough Find Me and Find Me 2, Fire Emblem Awakening, even though it's a strategy RPG. It doesn't really have a lot of strategy because it's really just an RPG. And Golden Sun, Kingdom Hearts, Mario RPG, Ni no Kuni for the DS. Paper Mario here and there, lots of Pokemons, Radiant Historia, RPG Maker, Saga Frontier, Star Ocean 2. I played a lot of RPGs. And all of them. They don't really have deep, what I consider to be deep battle systems. And, based on everything we've said, they're not supposed to, right? That's really not the point of them. I think there are better and worse ways of presenting a lot of this information to the player that doesn't necessarily have to be like, this game is so hard it kicks your butt kind of a way to make it deep. And a lot of RPGs still fail at doing that. So either way you look at it, we have such an interesting quandary here. What was the last RPG you played, Adrian?
Fallout.
Okay, 3D, open world style RPG. Or did you play the old one, the original?
The old one, yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's more old school. Yeah. So I've been playing Yokai Watch. The only reason I picked up this game is because I thought the battle system looked interesting, and it has this weird little thing where you spin your dudes on a wheel and you put in your team of 6 on a turnstile and you rotate them into battle so that they're neighbors. If you want to get one in, you kind of also have to get his neighbors in there, and I thought it would give the game some nice trade-offs, positional based trade-offs, where you can only have so many of your monsters on the screen, and if they got to be positioned a wheel, you got to be like, do I put all my strong guys together, do I put my healers together? Like there's interesting things happening there. The battle system's also in real time, and you can kind of use a 3D model to like put a target on very specific body parts for your team to attack it. Doesn't really do much in the game overall, but I thought all these ideas were interesting enough to investigate. So yeah, there's not a lot of deep or very interesting RPG systems. On the contrast, Paper Mario and a lot of Mario RPGs do a really interesting job, because they essentially put in WarioWare style mini games into their RPG-like gameplay, and everything's like an action, and all the actions are compartmentalized and simple and fun and have mix-ups and variety, and that's just basically an action game. It doesn't really matter if you level up, because especially in the Paper Mario games, your levels are pretty conservative. Because to get by in battle, you still got to do those actions, right? I really haven't found a video or build that you can cheese it just by like not doing that because you've leveled up so much. Yeah, so while Mario cheats and does real-time and spatial-based gameplay, other games, I guess Radiant Historia had a neat system, but it got tapped out pretty quickly, right? I really feel like a lot of RPGs, you don't need to be deep in order to make a fun experience, but there's definitely like a length in which your ideas run out, and you don't build like 100 more hours of your RPG after that. Battle systems have a limit, and by the time the player basically explores all the possibilities and maybe a few in between there, that's all you got. So unless you got a ton of real depth where you can explore it near endlessly, you got to be mindful of how long your game experience is going to be. Freaking Bravely Default lasted too long, and Persona 5 was too long. Oh man, it's too long.
So far as single player goes, I mean, I feel the Pokemon Colosseum and Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness probably the only games that made an honest effort to making an interesting single player Pokemon campaign.
Yeah.
The trainers were actually using, strategy.
Yeah, I heard about that. There's some late game Pokemon stuff where you can go to battle towers or subways or whatever they call them, and the AI and how they sort of auto level your Pokemon in there, and then the AI sort of creates a team that's kind of seems to be aware of what your team has to make the battle a little bit more interesting. That gets hard. It's all cheesable if you reach a high enough level of understanding, but for the most part, I feel like those battles are some real good battles. There's some gym battles in the game that are real good until they start using full restore and being idiots, and they're still doing that since Pokemon Red. I'm like, this is so stupid.
Oh my god.
It doesn't make the battle more interesting, it makes it worse, and they're still doing it. It's like they have no idea how people are enjoying the game since 1998, but whatever. So many problems.
It also sounds like one of the major things, and I don't know any other RPG that does this, but Pokemon seems to get a lot just from having that double blind, we both show our moves at the same time system, whereas other RPGs, they don't do that. At most, they'll have a sort of timeline, kind of like Grandia or Final Fantasy X, which I prefer those more to, nothing at all, and everyone goes on what the speed value is that you can't see. It also seems like the first thing that they resort to, because it's hard to make a one-on-one turn-based no space engagement interesting, the first thing they have to do is make teams. That's also one of the reasons why I think Pokemon's interesting, because it is a one-on-one minus that you switch them out in addition to the double blind aspect, but a lot of times they just have to do the whole 4v4 setup.
Bomb v bomb.
Yeah, except Lightning Returns. That is the only one I ever heard of where it's just like you're just one character,
Yeah, that
but I
is
have
so
no idea
odd.
how that game plays.
So there are a ton of different RPGs out there. Props to Square Enix, though they don't make a lot of games that are just like blowout hits like they used to. They are honestly trying so many things. Like honestly, Final Fantasy 15's battle system worked every now and then, looked cool enough, didn't really work as a game and had all these problems. But it's still, they try some really cool stuff. And even the Pocket version on my iPhone, right, they dumbed it down and made it touch-based. It's still kind of interesting, right? It has all these new little dynamics of interrupts and moving your character around the screen and warping to them and keeping track of your team. And I feel like so many RPGs have done so many neat things attempting to spruce up their battle system. This is Final Fantasy 15, by the way.
Yeah.
Riding in a car.
I'm not sure if it's a abstract, or maybe it is an abstraction on abstraction, but they try a lot of weird things. Like remember the whole paradigm system in Final Fantasy 13. It just seems like I don't know. I shouldn't say because I haven't actually played the game. Although it appears to be one of those games that's like misunderstood because I can't remember what video, but someone wrote an incredibly lengthy document trying to defend the battle system for that game, and it was one of the speedrunners who was actually like looking at the in-game data. Things like how, you know how in most RPGs your spells become useless once you get a stronger one?
Mm-hmm.
Apparently Final Fantasy 13, according to speedrunners, actually sidesteps that issue. I don't know how it does, but apparently it does.
Let me hit the lights real quick. It's getting dark. Yeah, I mean, I've done some deep digs into RPGs that people say have merit, and no. A lot of people think Fire Emblem has depth, and it does not. It's so like that's a really interesting point. There's a trend back whenever it started. Maybe it started with Dragon Quest or something, where people are like, "Oh, RPG battles. There's so many of them. They're random. They're boring. I do the same thing every time." So developers have tried a whole bunch of things to sort of mitigate that. One of the things is to turn the battle automatic. You're like, hey, if it's bored hitting A, why don't we just we'll hit A for you. Earthbound for Super Nintendo had a fast battle system. And while that may alleviate some frustration and pressure because the whole battle lasts less quick, I feel like none of it helped ultimately, right? You can't cover this problem up with a band-aid. It's a deep design problem, and it's a deep design problem because from its outset, the things that you're copying, the tropes and systems, were never designed to be gameplay. They were just designed to be relished for their complexity. Let me message this. But so like things with the auto battle doesn't really fix it. You'll get bored. It'll just be a little bit later. Final Fantasy 13's paradigm system similar. Like, when you used to switch into like a basic strategy and you have another basic strategy in another situation, why don't we call those paradigms? And then you just hit a button to switch from basic strategy to basic strategy. Sounds kind of cool. It is kind of cool. You gotta do a better job than 13 did to make that work, or at least I didn't get to Grand Pole, so I don't know how 13 balloons in its end game. But yeah, that's the problem. Like a lot of RPGs try to unfold the complexity over time too, so maybe the beginning is like the worst part on almost all RPGs. It's not helpful. Final Fantasy 12 had a gambit system, so your characters are running around similar to 13, but you can change their overall battle strategy to be like, aggressive, fall back, heal. You do something specific that I set you up for. That's also kind of neat. Secret of Mana also kind of has something like that for the NPCs, and a lot of RPGs, a lot of games have tried to play around with these systems. Bravely Default had a system where they'll copy the last moves you did. So if you're which is cool because if you fine tune a strategy for like the random enemies that appear in the area, you just go into another battle and hit it. It's just like la 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 la, and then you might have to stop because you're like, whoa, novelty! Like I didn't plan for this, and then you can just take over. But that only helps a little bit. And like Bravely Default lets you turn off random battles in case they bother you. So I turned them off. And while I didn't get bothered by random battles, the game was missing something, and I don't consider that to be a great fix. It was just a decent fix it was like a band-aid for the wound or whatever. And even still, Bravely Default almost burned me out playing so many battles. So like, geez. Zarach says, any game with an auto battle feature implies and proves that the game is so shallow a simple CPU could do it. Ouch. So, like you're saying, Adrian, a lot of Final Fantasy 13-2 did a different battle system. Final Fantasy 13 Lightning Returns had like an action game battle system where Lightning has parries and all this other crazy stuff. And I still have no idea ultimately how these systems shake out because they're changing them rapidly and there's just tons of games. Radiant Historia had a neat pure turn-based battle system where it was your opponents were on a grid. Let me pull up a screenshot because why talk about something when I could show you. This is a good enough picture. View image, open image, and new tab. There we go. It's a small image. Forgive me. Let's zoom it up. So in Radiant Historia, your team, your crew is like lined up like this, and your opponents are on a 3x3 grid. And as you can see here, there's two shielders in front and a stronger dude in back. Classic battle formation in Advance Wars or something like that. Your attacks can have spatial properties like a cross shape like you can see here. You can have special attacks that don't do a lot of damage but push them around the grid. Sometimes the grid has traps like bombs or sand pits or whatever. Sometimes triggering the traps hurts you. Sometimes if you knock the right thing into it, it hurts them. All these creative little ideas. Within a single combo, you can lump two enemies on the same square or three enemies or four enemies and just push them like into each other, then stack them against each other in the back row, and then attack them all. And when they're all on the same square, whenever you hit it, they all take damage. So you want to like crunch them up, kind of like a freaking ball of trash, and then wail on it, and then they fan back out. That's a thing. But when they're in the back row, they take less damage because that's a defensive row. And so you kind of want to lump them up in the front of the row, but that's harder. And even explaining all that, there's a bunch of variety. And then you got different character archetypes that you have in your party, different amount of people in your party. And this game also lets you see the turn order like Final Fantasy X. So with all that, you're like, whoa, that sounds like a cool battle system. Yeah, it was a cool battle system for about 15, 20 hours. And the game's like 25, 35 hours, I guess. So you're like, yeah, it kind of got old when you're like, they can't beat me. But, you know, as far as learning the ropes and engaging with this new system, great stuff from Radiant Historia. So yeah, some RPGs have done a great job, some RPGs less so. Even Paper Mario Color Splash had a neat idea with the paint. I don't think they pulled it off like to the point where it's like this is super fun and genius, but it was a neat attempt. Sticker Star tried its own thing. What were you going to say, Adrian?
Oh, no, I wasn't going to say anything, but I almost forgot about Sticker Star because, and Daniel had the same thought, like, my primary interest is like, whoa, this is a game that has an RPG, you know, turn-based combat, but they completely scrapped the leveling up aspect of it, and I wanted to see how they approached that, but it seems like nobody likes it.
Hit and miss for it, depending on what you're, whatever. Yeah, so sidestepping even taking and picking some RPG elements, if you're missing the core dynamics or you don't understand how these elements are going to fit together, really doesn't matter how much you appear to be mixing things up. What I liked about Sticker Star and Color Splash was this idea that through exploration, you gain a finite set of interactable objects, your stickers or your paint. When you do battle, the decisions you make and the effectiveness of which you use your moves, you know, conserves more stickers or paint or wastes it. And even though that might not be too big for one battle, as you journey deeper into these, like, you know, dungeony areas, you know, the suspension of those elements start to bite you. Like, oh, I wish I didn't use that sticker way back then. I wish I had more red paint to do this. And like that would have been such a neat idea to sort of make a lot of small decisions a little bit more meaningful over time. But, you know, I think a lot of RPGs just kind of err on, you know what, make it simple and make sure that they can just do it without thinking too much at the sacrifice of how interesting these systems could be. So that happens. Happens a lot.
Mhm.
But the ultimate claim is just I don't think these kinds of systems make deep games. I don't think they do. I don't think they were designed for that, and I don't think they ever will. And exploring what the game is, it can last you a lot of the enjoyment of an RPG. So being mindful of that is important. But making sure that you don't treat your game like it's deep when it's not is also important. So that card games are very similar to RPGs, and you said, Stick Color Splash and Bite and Kaidos has a card system. Kingdom Hearts GBA has a card system. Children of the Zodiacs, the indie Final Fantasy Tactics X game has a sweet dice rolling system and cards. Cards are just, a system. Just because they look like cards doesn't mean they act like they don't act like any other RPG system, but it's really neat to see people add new rules and new systems and new elements into it to try to freshen things up. With cards, you might have a limited deck, or you might have one-time use cards, or you might have all these other limitations, but it kind of depends. But essentially, what we said in the other DL Live was that card games have a hard time being deep. It's hard time being deep for the same reason RPGs do. Being turn-based and not having any real-time elements or double-blind elements or blindness in your game is hard to make deep. But, I'd like to know a lot more about games like Magic the Gathering and how they do it. I played Pokemon and Magic when I was in middle school. So that was a long time ago, and I haven't really kept up too much with Magic at all.
Yeah.
Grab bag. So too many games feel like a grab bag of details, systems, and the resulting game is just like, hey, it is what it is. And I feel like not enough people have taste and appreciation and an understanding of how the level of when the details come together, right? So it's like, oh, I love vanilla cake. I love vanilla. I love flour. I love salt. I love baking powder. I love eggs. And I love sugar. I love vanilla cake. You're like, great. Even with all those ingredients, you could have a bad vanilla cake because they don't get the balance right. It can not rise because they didn't put in enough baking powder. It could be pulled out of the oven too soon, so it's just goop in the middle. It could be overcooked, so it's dry. There is a whole level of quality that, despite having the same basic underlying elements, that you need to be mindful of. And I feel like too many people settle for just like, oh, it's got details I like, it's good. That's how people talk about stories. They like one character and they think the anime is great. It is not great. They like one cool scene and they think the show's amazing. It's not amazing. The show is all the other things too, and you gotta consider that. So I feel like a lot of people just sit there and watch shows until something, quote unquote, they didn't see coming, or something surprises them, or they just see something familiar, and they do the same with just about every other thing in life. So RPGs are no exception, but I feel like people just obsess and like, look, it's got all this detail, isn't that great? I'm like, it's not great. It's all right. Could be great. Like, tell me what they do. Tell me how it comes together. I'll tell you if it's great.
Yeah, one major thing I think I've gotten from this is that I know you're not a whole fan of the whole type weakness thing, but it seems like the way Pokemon gets around is by, one, having way more types than the average RPG does. Average RPG is maybe like 5 types, fire, ice, water, wind, electric, all that other jazz. Pokemon has as many as 17, 18 types now, is it?
17?
I think it's 18, because they added fairy, right? That would make it 18.
It's one of those numbers. Keep going.
Yeah. Well, the point is that they get way more into it, and you actually have more of a reason to weigh out, like, why should I use this attack over this attack, and it plays into the type advantage system, whereas you don't even have that in any other RPG. Your character does not have a type. Your character has a generic attack that doesn't play into that system. They have to cast a spell in order to do that, but even then it just becomes hit the red thing with the red spell, hit the blue thing with the blue spell, that kind of junk.
You reminded me of an article I wrote. It was just talking about the design space of Pokemon. Let's see.
Yeah, see, look at that. Look at that fucking Advance Wars chart right there.
Oh, where's my article? I talked about. It was wrinkles in Design Space. There it was. So
Yeah.
it's in, not only like you're saying, did Pokemon need to have a lot of types, but they also need to make sure that each type didn't have 3 advantages, 3 weaknesses, and 1 nullification. Like, no, that's not how you do it. You want to make your design space uneven, which makes your decisions unequally attractive, which helps make interesting decisions that much more prominent. But look, you can look at this chart here, this article here. I still need to. I need to post these articles into my description, so I need to keep track of them. Speed monkey.
Yeah, so while HP is one-dimensional, and it's just like, oh, well, what makes Pokemon so special? It's just about making the number go to 0. That chart right there is not.
Yeah. Yeah, this is
And again,
something
double
unique.
blind aspect too.
Yeah, and the fact that Pokemon being able to win in multiple axes, right? Like, I'm going to just play status effects and use hazards, indirect attacking, or I'm going to use pure offense and just crush you, or I'm going to play stall and recover and just like slowly choke you out. Those are all pretty legitimate ways to go about the game. And then there's mixed versions of all those strategies. And then there's this whole like X factor of some of the moves are just so unique. The design space of the games and the moves that they have are so unique, like Trick Room. And it makes the slowest Pokemon go first, or just reverses the turn order. So if you were fast, like used to being fast and going first, now you're second in a 1v1 situation. So that can make the slowest Pokemon, where speed was their biggest disadvantage, some of the most powerful Pokemon in the game. But the move only lasts 4 turns, including the turn you cast it. And it's kind of hard to cast. It's kind of hard to set up. And there's all these other factors and considerations. And when they see your team and know that only certain Pokemon can use Trick Room, they start to hedge and plan ahead. And there's all this cool back and forth mentally and strategically in the game that happens because the game is so complex, but managed by these specific kinds of systems, like you're saying.
I feel like usually this is one of the reasons why card games are better at getting around the one-dimensionality problem, because much like the attacks in Pokemon, all the complexity is in the cards themselves, and they're not as straightforward as just do damage.
Yeah.
All the card games have their own issues.
Yeah, true that. True that. So let's see. Yeah, I said just like stories, you need more discerning taste to not just accept a random mix of ingredients. You really got to start having thoughts and opinions on how things come together. Otherwise, you're really limiting yourself, right? Like if you think every cake in the world is good just because they have those ingredients, then you're gonna miss out on like the best cakes, and you're gonna think the worst cakes are the same, and you're not gonna have even a high low of those experiences. You're not gonna know the difference between a cake made with care and love and craft versus just like and throw it in the oven. Like, then you're not really paying attention to the variety and details and complexity of life. Then your opinion's flat, your taste is flat, your tongue is flat. Firecake says, I think I understand how a double-blind system helps RPGs. It gives the actions a sort of momentum, something you can't back out of, like using a strong attack in a fighting game. You have to evaluate the possibilities of being countered and the chances that you can benefit from your decisions. That's a really good point, Firecakes. Another way to explain it is saying double-blind interplay is interplay immediately, right? When you're playing an RPG, oftentimes you can describe it as a war of attrition, where you're trying to out DPS the other person, do more damage per second or whatever per turn, and you're like, oh, I'm going to comfortably cruise at this attack rate because I do more damage and I heal faster, therefore I'm going to win. Like that to me is just like a simple linear equation, a simple optimization problem, or a race as I call it. But as soon as you have double blind, like you're saying, that's something that can't be optimized. The very nature of a 50-50 means if I go this way, I lose. If I go this way, I win. How do you optimize that? You have to make the choice and then live with the consequences, and then maybe have that information feed back into your later decisions. It gets really rich really fast because that's an actual system that works. It's an actual dynamic interplay system instead of just stats in a table and then interacting with them in as a one-dimensional way as possible.
Yeah.
Hey,
Here.
Frank joined us. What's up, Frank?
Oh, just listen to Pokemon.
Oh, cool.
Talk about Pokemon.
Yeah, we discussed quite a lot of things on this primer. This is just like the first of my long attack against RPGs, and I just don't feel like RPG systems. I don't feel like they're easy to implement to a good game, but that's kind of I don't want anyone to give up hope, right? I've what is it? Like I said, I played a lot of RPGs. I could tune them. I could sit there and like redesign just by tweaking values and stuff the entire game to actually be like a fun game. It's just a matter of knowing what that experience is, what it requires, and then having everything else shift to support it. Shift, not break, not bend, not delete itself, whatever. I don't even know what that metaphor is going. But yeah, like I imagined a version of Persona 5 that instead of just being like, more battles, same weakness break system, which was pretty flat. That game had a ton of complexities for that battle system being pretty straightforward, pretty flat. Hit the enemy with their weakness because it gives you an extra turn. That is so powerful that you have to do it. Like, you should not do it. And then they give one character basically enough variety to have all the attacks in the game, and that character has to be in your party. But then when that character dies, because the opponents randomly attack him and focus on him, you lose the match. Like, some garbage right there. Like, all of those decisions, I'd clean that up in a heartbeat. But essentially, I was inspired by what Persona 5 is to be like, oh, if they just tweaked a few things, this wouldn't just be instead of what it is now, it wouldn't just be a good game. It'd be like, this is amazing, right? This is so fun. I'm going to play that dungeon again. I've never heard anyone say that about an RPG. Oh, that random battle quest was so fun. I want to go back in it again. No. But if I got my tweaks for Persona 5, I'd be like, after you beat that dungeon, you're going to be like, oh, I reset. Like, let's go. It'd be so fun and interesting. And people don't even know. People have no idea. But that's fine. I want to do it.
Persona 5 a lot. Or in everything, but for the battle system. And because it's just... Like you talked about Pokemon earlier, it has weaknesses and everything, but Persona 5 is like, do this, then do this, then do this.
Yeah.
And so yeah, with completely.
It's just like that fictive RPG example. It's just like, okay, you extended it by one extra step, but it's still pretty flat.
Yeah, definitely. So that's also another good reason to understand what kind of systems you're putting into your game, so you don't add complexity hoping that it makes the game more interesting when it really just delays the inevitable, right? That's why it's important to have language and to freaking understand design and play more genres than the genre you want to make the game in and have more interest than just video games. All this is important. But hey, we're just talking about RPG elements right now. Maybe I'd rant about Fire Emblem. Maybe that's a whole nother video. It's probably a whole nother video. I'll put a note for that. Where is it? Oop. String notes. Oh, there's this cool board game idea I had, or RPG game, but that's for another day. I'll rant about Fire Emblem later. Yeah, any last questions? Any random things you want to ask? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm good.
Nah, I jumped in too late, so I don't really have anything.
That's cool. So good luck. We kind of have a better idea of how a lot of common RPG elements. I guess I could complain about items for a bit. I just don't like it how you have endless pockets and you just get stuff without looking at what it is, and eventually you just have a ton of junk. Like, that's bad in real life. It's called hoarding. Like, you don't want that to happen, to just amass a bunch of endless junk. Even if you can sell it all swiftly in the game, I just don't feel like... I come from a lot of different artistic backgrounds, and for a story, every word has to matter. And everything you put on the page has to be important. Not Chekhov gun, determining the plot, important, but important enough. And I just feel like if it hits the brain, then it's a detail, right? So you can do a lot of stuff behind the scenes in video games and have things crunching, but if it's in front of the player, it's kind of like words on the page for a book. And you don't want to just be like, hey, another random battle, experience points, items, what did I get? AA, doesn't matter. Just throw it in a thing and like, why? Why? That just seems like a side effect from copying and copying and copying, and now people just think it's normal, but it's not good. Even if you think it's neutral, it's not good. So if you want to make a good game, why don't we do a little bit more effort of making each item a little bit more significant, both getting, acquiring, using, selling, whatever, instead of just going through the same RPG motions of like, invest in HP and attack, save up, skip an armor purchase session so you can get the next best armor, invest in this, like these little rules of thumbs that we use in a lot of RPGs that are just like, it's cool coming up with those initially, but now let's talk about some real gameplay, interesting scenarios, right? Let's talk about some real risk reward, some real consequences, some real suspension, and then let those things tell the story. Because no one's telling the story about how they grabbed a random item after a countless battle and sold it eventually and got just enough money to buy another random piece of gear that they were linearly tuned to get at that point in the game. Nobody's telling that story. It's not a story. So for all you people who like RPGs because of story, get over it. Because the story that you're playing is not good. And then the little story segments in between are rough as it is. So like they have problems. And if you sandwich even a good story in between some ho-hum, mediocre, Melbatos activity in between, then that's also not good. So you got to have like higher standards even if you're a story person. I'm a story person. My background is storytelling and story writing, creative writing, fiction. This is not good.
Jeez.
That's a confusing issue, especially RPGs that have items. This is to be sold. They do nothing. Certain prices.
Yeah.
Why don't they just adjust gold gains me that way and just give the player more gold right off the bat? Because all it's doing is reason for it. Maybe it encourages players to interact with NPCs more, but I think that's being pretty generous.
They're like lore extenders. Instead of giving them money, you give them an item that they at least have to take a peek at. Maybe it has a cool image graphic, maybe it has a cool word, but then if you ultimately just sell it, you're like, at least they just didn't get money, right? Like, that's the classic, do I give them cash for a present or do I try to give them a gift card scenario? Like, look, I kind of thought about your interests. You're like, oh, thank you. Oh, here's some cash out of my pocket.
I know you had something in regards about items to Persona 5, because I know you brought it up once before in one of our chats.
Yeah, you get a lot of them. And you just keep getting them and getting them and getting them. And there's so many interesting and precise conversations we can have about how individual games have built these systems. Persona in particular, I think, has too many intersecting systems with its quote-unquote currency. With every monster that you get, you can boil it down and turn it into an item, boil it down and merge its strength with an existing one, fuse two together and get a new monster, hold it in your party to try to complete a recipe requirement of having like XXX monster, like up 2 to 3, or capturing specific monsters to be a bounty so that you can cash it in with these like 2 characters that want you to hunt specific monsters. And yeah, between all that, it's like, oh, you can use it to basically further the story, just as collectibles in themselves, power up your monsters, make new monsters, or turn into items. That like touches every part of the combat. And you're like, that's a lot from just monsters, right? In my opinion, And I think a lot of those are legacy features. Like Persona 4 had, let's say, 4 out of the 5 of those, and Persona 3 had 3 out of the 5. That's what I'm guessing. So that, fans would just roll forward with the feature, and they're there if you want or know how to use them, and not if you don't. They're not that big of a deal. So that's my best guess. But that game, you get a lot of junk.
Trying to do anything with it because your number of actions per day are limited.
Yeah, we got to the end game and started using some of those items, which happens a lot based on the way I play RPGs. Like, get as far as you can using the basics, and all of a sudden, when it gets hard, you either finally go to the shop and buy some weapons, or bust out the items. And we busted out the items late game. But you're in trouble then because those are limited. So you're like, oh no.
So the other aspects, at least about the more turn-based style RPGs, is just the whole do only one thing at a time per turn, because that's why they end up having to resort to using multiple characters. Because thinking on Advance Wars, you have so many decisions that you make in just that one turn that how are you ever gonna make anything interesting if the character can only do one thing most of the time, which is going to be attack. And then beyond that, there's the issue of, it seems like RPGs keep putting the complexity into parts that the complexity they keep putting into is items, equipment, upgrades, and then your usual, where do I invest my skill points? Higher attack, higher defense. It's just like, it's all the same thing. It's all that same one-dimensional problem.
With Bravely Default, I think it's one of my best examples of a game. Let's take a look at blah, blah, blah. Design awards. Do I have one for class system? Class. 3D platformer. Camera classic game. No. Let's see. Okay, so I'll add one. Best examples of a class system done in a game. Modes and features. Let's type in Bravely. I call it Bravely Default because I still have that weird English default. But yeah, you can pick different classes in this game, and as a lot of them do, you can take some abilities from the classes you were before if you get them up at a high enough level, which encourages you to commit to them at least somewhat, and then mix and match your own character. And the legacy of your character's abilities is the history of your decisions you've made, experimenting with this part of the game and that part of the game. That's pretty cool. The different classes in Bravely were pretty sweet. They touched so many aspects of the game. Like, one was what was it? Not a banker, but like a money man or whatever, a businessman. And all your stuff involves sort of like getting more money out of the enemies when you defeat them in battle. Literally throwing your money as an attack, but it takes away your money. But it's flat damage, so it ignores weakness resistance, which is great sometimes. But it's costly. And other weird things that get you in the headspace of a banker. Investment. Like, if I invest in this much gain over time, do I get this much at the end of the battle? And all of a sudden you're thinking like a money man. There's other classes like ninjas that had cool things like Bushins and counters and redirecting other people's rage into other characters, so you're just all slippery and no one can hurt you, but your defenses are low. And they were pretty creative with so many other classes. So sometimes it's like, even if you're mostly running the same linear one-dimensional equation, again, there's more ways to make a fun game than just this battle is deep. And on the contrary, I don't think people actually like deep games, and I don't think they like strategy games. If you consider most people are pretty casual about everything, and RPGs are a popular genre because they're so flat and casual, and they are so story focused, which is like the casual gamers, foot in the door, then RPGs might not do so well actually being legit games unless you are like Nintendo and can really balance sort of the skill floor and have a high skill ceiling with a lot of your games. So yeah, a lot of people, when they're like, this battle system's easy, I'm like, stop playing RPGs. That's what I would say. Like, they're not meant to be challenging. That's it. You can tell immediately when you play like your second RPG. You're like, it's the same. Cool. That's enough of me ranting for now. Next time we'll talk. What are we going to talk about RPGs next time? I hit a lot of topics. I kind of want to talk about some specific games every now and then, but we'll see the next time I talk about RPGs. We might have a more playable example. I actually downloaded Child of Light, that Ubisoft action RPG kind of thingy to play for this, but I never played it, so I couldn't get it ready. So too bad, everyone. Until next time, on the next episode of DL Live, I'm Richard Terrell, Kirby Kid.